Well, ladies and gentlemen, you're listening and watching Rashkin Report. My name is Yuri Rashkin. Thank you for being there. I appreciate it. So we get together every other week with Mikhail Iossel, a writer, a thinker, a person, a professor at Concordia University. And topics we discuss, topics of the day. There's news to be discussed, and boy, there's news today. But sometimes we do this in Russian, sometimes we do this in English. Today, I asked Mikhail to do a show, an episode in English, because I think that there's really important perspective both ways. And so I think it's important on a day like this to actually have a conversation in English with the understanding and the perspective that Mikhail brings to this, having been born in the USSR, as was I, but having lived now for quite a long period of time, decades, out in North America. Mikhail lives in Montreal. I'm in Wisconsin. Where is Wisconsin? It's there. It's right there where it needs to be, in the middle of everything. And so let's talk about Russia. Mikhail, tell me, today Putin announces, annexation of territories. Big day for Putin and his cronies. Do you feel that this is a reason to be depressed, or do you feel that this is a reason to be kind of excited that perhaps this show is about to get wrapped up because he's being so crazy, that this is just too much and we're going to get to see the end of this? How do you feel?
Well, I feel that events are kind of slipping out of anyone's control. I feel that we probably in the next days and weeks ahead, at most weeks ahead, we'll see kaleidoscopic chain of events, and I think Putin is feeling desperate. He's being humiliated, and his army is being humiliated endlessly in Ukraine. And I think he may be, well, he definitely is cornered. He is deranged. He is insane, quite frankly. And he's turned the country into basically an insane fascist state right now. But I fear that he may be a little more cornered than the world can afford it. But there is nothing to be done about it. I feel that, I believe that when he's when he feels completely desperate and fully enthralled of the military in the in his inner circle, he basically is their hostage now. I'm just afraid that he might actually resort to a tactical nuclear strike, to which the West, and that mainly means the United States, the UK, France, to a lesser degree, will respond, have already said that they will respond in a most decisive manner, probably not in reciprocal nuclear strike, but nonetheless. And when Putin feels that basically it's his life or nothing, he may well, a person like him may well decide to take as many people as possible along with him down. And that's a very disquieting thought, I think. But I think that that indeed, with this, I don't think it's something that Putin was looking forward to. I don't think this was on his timetable, this, annexation and basically pronouncing part of Russia, those 4 areas, which, by the way, those 4 four clowns that were in the Kremlin today, they do not control, and Russia doesn't control even as we speak. There is a large, well over 1,000 people, contingent of Russian army that is being encircled, and basically probably we'll see them as captives pretty soon near Liman, which is also a very large territory in the Donetsk region. In other words, no one in the world, with the possible exception of Belarus, is going to recognize this annexation as part of Russia. And so there will be war with doubled fury on the part of Ukraine, trying to retake that territory, and Russian army is in retreat. And so what will Putin do if, you know, he needed as if he needed one, but he needed basically a formal pretext for launching a nuclear strike, because territorial integrity of Russia is at stake, and he now considers those four areas Russian territory. Will he? Is it pure bluff? I don't know. Normally, generally, when people say I'm not bluffing, that means they're bluffing. But I don't think he's in control of the situation now either, at all. I think the most hawkish of the military in his surrounding, in his inner circles, are the one calling the shots. And he's basically, that's what I think. That's what I think.
Well, but would you say that this is an act of desperation? This is something he's losing in order for him to play his game, which is to get to the negotiation table, right? And then solidify. That's what he wants. Because we're concentrating our attention right now on the threat that he is proposing. But there's also something that he actually wishes to accomplish, right? He wants to sit at the table of negotiations and offer, you know, peace, perhaps for now, as a way to legitimize holding all of that territory that he just declared, you know, through all of his legal terms to be now part of Russia. And so I was wondering, isn't this like a losing, kind of a running away and trying to hold on to all the looted washing machines, kind of a technology, you know, approach? Isn't this an indication that he is desperate and losing? And yes, he could resort to nuclear weapon, but there's other implications, right, to losing?
Well, as I said, I don't think this annexation and federalization of those four areas in Ukraine were on his timetable, but I think that the puppet, you know, leaders of those areas, the Russian factotums in those areas, seeing what happened in the Kharkiv region, realized that they just need to immediately fall under his protection. Basically, took advantage of the situation. I think that they forced his hand. So that's one thing. Secondly, he said today in the Kremlin, and I think that's kind of undeniable, that he will not discuss anymore, you know, those four territories. And Zelensky has already said that there is nothing to negotiate with Putin about, and that he just needs to be defeated. He just needs to be defeated. I don't think he needs to be negotiated with. Nobody negotiated with Hitler in 1944, although, as we know, the Soviet TV serial 17 Moments of Spring told us otherwise, that there were intense negotiations with alternatives to Hitler, of course, on the part of the Americans and the UK, with alternatives to Putin. But there is no alternative to Putin right now. In his, or at least we don't know, is there a saner, you know, group of people in a very tight circle of his close advisors? I don't know. I don't think so. I'm pretty sure that there are numerous people probably contemplating the way to get rid of him. But you know, it's I think that what it will boil down to in the end, actually.
Mikhail, this in the end, what about Russian people? You know, don't they care about what's going on?
Now they do.
Or are they like hostages? You know, just this is their, like, now have Stockholm syndrome, as was often said, or they identify with their captors. But how are the Russian people, in your opinion, are handling all of this excitement that seems to be happening elsewhere?
Well, since the beginning of the war, and in two installments, after February 24th and September 21st, at least 500,000 Russians have fled, right? And in many instances, it's the best people of Russia, or the best brains of Russia, or the future brains of Russia, right? It's the IT people, it's the talented people, so it's the West's gain in the end. But you know, when people talk about Russians resisting, why don't they stay in Russia and resist and fight? It's entirely understandable, and of course it's understandable when people in Ukraine say that, and they have the right to say that. But people in the West who say that, I think it betrays a certain degree of naivety. It's like, to the same extent, why would people, about the nature of a totalitarian regime, why wouldn't people in North Korea rebel and dethrone Kim Jong-un, for instance? Or in the extreme case, it would be, you know, why were Jews going meekly, just without putting up resistance to all those extermination camps? Why didn't they rebel? Why didn't they put up an uprising? You know, you can't
Mikhail,
fight.
then does it mean that Russian people need to be liberated from the outside, to be liberated from their oppressors, also Russian?
Well, think about Germany in 1940s. Hitler committed suicide in the end. As I said, I think there will need to be found a way to get rid of him. That's how it's going. It's not going to be crowds of people rushing towards Kremlin with you know, homemade weapons. It's not going to be like that. It's not like that in totalitarian societies.
All right. Well, in the meantime, there's several other things that are happening with Ukraine, and with mobilization in Russia, and escape of Russian men. I mean, I'm a man, you're a man. How do you feel about all of these men running away rather than serve in Russian army? Because it doesn't sound like they like Ukraine very much.
Well,
but
there is no they, you know. They're kind of, to a certain extent, all of them are different. Some of them are going willingly just because they were ordered to do so. Lots of brainwashed people, and probably at least 50% of people in Russia are brainwashed to the extent that mothers are blessing their children to go. And but it's what kind of choice is that? Either you're going to Ukraine, you will shoot from an old rifle, and then you will kill somebody, and then you will get killed, or at best captured. What kind of choice is that? So of course they're running. What else can they do? I don't see much of an alternative. Or those who cannot. Not everyone can flee, by the way. People need to have money for that, at least initially. People need to have means to get to the border, and of course the ways of escaping now are extremely difficult and few and far between. It's either Kazakhstan or it's Georgia. But nonetheless, you know, they're trying to escape, and if they cannot escape, they will be hiding. Russia is a humongous landmass, and they will be hiding somewhere. The people will be, relatives will be hiding people away. Like, you know, it's war. People don't want to participate in a war that they don't have any reason to participate in. It's not. There is zero enthusiasm for this war, and more people are against this war. And Putin understood that it would be highly unpopular, but in the end, he had to again bend to the will of his generalitet, the generals in the military, who are hawks and the war profiteers, and they convinced him that Russian army doesn't stand a chance unless it gets replenished somehow, but is getting replenished with poorly trained people who are not motivated, who hate being there, and so forth. So whatever, it's going to be terrible. So of course people are trying to flee, obviously, hide, escape.
So then this is what I'm trying to understand. If they're trying to escape, are they refugees? Do they qualify as refugees, and should they be accepted, for instance, by the United States, by Canada? Canada is accepting all these poor Ukrainians. That it's amazing. I'm grateful to Canadian government for making this such wise decision. But what about Russians who don't want to fight in Putin's war? Should they be accepted as well, or what should the rules be there? How do you see it?
How are they going to get to the United States or Canada? At this point, they're just queuing in 20-kilometer auto lines on the border with Georgia and Kazakhstan. I have no idea how they're going to get to, but my guess would be that no, they won't be treated as, unless, in certain European countries, of course, they will be applying for political asylum. And it's a perfectly legitimate process, but they will not be treated probably as the Ukrainian refugees, and with good reason, I would say. But I would say that countries behave themselves in different manner because countries have different social compact with their people and different history and different historical memories. So in some ways, it's understandable that Estonia and Latvia and Lithuania don't want to see Russians men fleeing from war on their territory, and Finland doesn't want to turn its territory into basically just a passage point for tens or maybe hundreds of thousands of people that would just transit through them on the way someplace else. It's a humanitarian catastrophe, and I think right now the best bet for men is Kazakhstan. Kazakhstan has a huge territory and relatively scarcely populated, and is trying to position itself as leaning toward the West, and so it seems to be treating Russian men well. And Georgia is a tiny little country that is now overrun with Russians, and that's so it's altogether all around. It's a very difficult and fairly tragic situation. Yes, set off by, just to think of it, just an absolute human non-entity, basically, just third-tier KGB factotum, just this whim of history that put him in charge of world events. But that there you go. Every 100 years or so, the world seems to be going through another wave of insanity.
Mikhail, let me ask you, and you know what I will first say, press like, subscribe to Rashkin Report, where you will find from time to time programming in English and lots of interesting programming in Russian, should you also speak that language. So come on back. Mikhail, there's a certain feeling of superiority that is ascribed to Russian people often, superiority to everybody. And in this situation, we find this demographic group of Russian men all of a sudden being the underdog, because they're going to these other countries for, not in the best of circumstances, and they're competing against those that have been there all of their life, and now they're the second sort of category of people. And in fact, like in Kazakhstan, that announced that they will be returning people that Russia is searching for, trying to reclaim to go serve in the military. Kazakhstan's like, yeah, sure, we'll do it. but it doesn't sound like, I guess, that there's much enthusiasm in this. But that
They-
means that Russians, once again, are going to be like second-class citizens or second-class residents. Is that like a big awakening for people, or how do you see this as a writer?
Ooh, as a writer, as a human being, as
Right.
as former Soviet citizen, as whatever, but not a citizen, subject. But yeah, this war will change Russia forever. It will change its mentality, its understanding of itself. Probably will reshape its territory. And it will be reverberating for decades and decades to come everywhere. And Russian people, of course, now in an unenviable situation, but in some ways one could say they brought it on themselves, because in the majority they kept voting for Putin and they settled themselves with him to begin with, which is completely incomprehensible. Just the unrepentant member of the organization that in the 20th century basically had exterminated millions of Russian people. Yeah, okay, come and be our czar. And then, of course, exhibiting lack of interest in politics when Putin essentially tacitly told them that they shouldn't be meddling in politics. It's none of their business. They should just consume the benefits of his rule, and so forth. So and now they're but then it's like 100 years ago, 1917, right? Russian nobility singing in the restaurants in Paris, sweeping streets in Berlin, right? I mean, just babysitting in Buenos Aires. Huge Russian communities in Harbin, in China, everywhere. Fleeing. It's like from the Bolshevik Revolution. This time they are fleeing from the fascism that came over Russia, from the fascist state, and everything happens very quickly, and they will need time to readjust their mindset and to realign themselves with the reality somehow. It's a tragic situation, however.
Do you anticipate that there could be a peaceful transfer of power in Russia?
No. Putin cannot step down. We kind of all understand that. He will cease to exist 10 minutes later. But this is all about him staying in power. That's all he wants right now. In order to survive, he needs to stay in power. So no peaceful transition, different kind of transition, okay? That Russian history also had precedents with, numerous. So different kind of transition. What kind of peaceful transition can there be? He intends fully to run. It makes zero sense right now even to use that word, to run, in 2024. In the same way, of course, but there are no free elections in Russia. They weren't even several years ago. They weren't for 2 decades, really. And now it will be Soviet-style elections, 99.9%. So no, I don't think.
So here's the question: Is there going to be a revolution that's going to come from the bottom up, as we've seen throughout Russian history, or is it going to be a change from the top down, as we've seen with like Gorbachev?
I don't. Well, indeed, in 1917, there were 2 revolutions, right? There was the revolution in February, so-called bourgeois revolution, as we were called, and that was brought about by starvation and by the war that came close to Russian boundaries. So it was a revolution of desperate people, and it was relatively peaceful. I don't foresee anything like that. And then, of course, several months later, in November of same year, on the 7th of November, New Style, a group of basically, mutineers led by Lenin group of Bolsheviks, they took advantage of the disintegrating power and just they picked up the power from the floor, essentially. But and that's ushered in the greatest tragedy in Russian history, of course. But that was 100 years ago. Right now, the regime is infinitely better prepared technically. Can you imagine how he has a huge army of centurions, millions of people that are not fighting in Ukraine, by the way. They're in Moscow, they're in St. Petersburg, they're all across Russia, fully equipped with modern weaponry and unbounded cruelty, who will not let any kind of crowd come close to the Red Square. But we can see that there are of course uprisings and mass protests on the periphery of Russia in ethnic enclaves like Dagestan, like Yakutia, and so forth. But that's because those people, basically people in Dagestan, people in Yakutia, people in majority ethnic minority regions, have always felt or perceived Russia as an imperial power, and probably have way more affinity right now with Ukrainians than with Russians. But we can see that even the women of Dagestan who are protesting very vigorously, right, and chasing away the police and so forth, in the middle of the night, they are being arrested, and they're probably, that's how the regime is ruthless and extremely well armed and well stocked with cruel people to, defend itself. So I don't see revolution in Russia future, but I do see an attempt to rid Russia of Putin.
Is this the result of so-called negative selection?
No, I don't know. But generations upon generations upon generations of people who do not believe that anything in their lives depends on them, that it's not in their power to elect, to tell their rulers how to rule them, that powers that be high above in the Kremlin, that they're more or less unchangeable like the weather, or uninfluenceable as like the weather. If it's raining, take an umbrella. If it's hot, take off the layers. If it's cold, layer up. That's how you deal with that's how Russians are used to dealing with the history in their country. They do not believe that they are. They believe that they are there to be ruled, that they have to adjust to whatever, and so they are adjusting. But they're adjusting in order to survive, and so all those men fleeing now, they're trying to survive. They don't want to be killed. Nor do they want to kill. So yeah, but it's, I don't know if it's negative selection. I don't know history is engaged in selection, but it's a historical tradition. Unfortunately, in Russia, yes, people are passive, inordinately patient and passive. So yeah.
It seems like one of the actual effects of this Russian Putinization of Russia is that everyone is for themselves, which is kind of like the state's not going to come and save you. You got to take care of yourself. Isn't it kind of opposite of what you're saying a little bit?
No, I think the main effect of the Putinization of Russia was this injection of tremendous and steady doses of cynicism in the Russian collective vein, basically, that there is nothing to be done. Yes, we may be thieves, but what do you think? American president is not a thief. Everybody is a bad person. Everybody is worse than they think they are. People are worse than they think they are, and there is nothing to be done about it. But Putin has dispersed basically the civil society in Russia. There are no organized groups that could provide any kind of resistance, with the exception perhaps of the Committee of Soldiers' Mothers, so-called Women of Russia, which he doesn't want to touch necessarily because it's just would look horrible inside Russia. But generally, there are no political leaders left with any like even remotely opposing point of view. They're either abroad or they're in jail or they're dead. Like, you know, Navalny is in prison, Nemtsov is dead, killed, Khodorkovsky is in the West, the only oligarch that kind of provides like steady kind of ideological resistance from abroad and so forth. There are no group. He has basically eliminated. He's just thoroughly just scorched out the political field in Russia. And now he is actually paying for this too, because he's become hostage to the most belligerent militaristic generals in his surrounding. He's basically become hostage of the military industrial complex in Russia, which is just as corrupt as everything else in Russia, which is why the Russian army, which was supposed to be the #2 army in the world, is having its butt kicked by Ukraine, which was like number 25 or 35 or 55. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. Russian army has been tremendously exposed and humiliated. And that's Putin's humiliation. That's what he is paying for and will continue to pay for.
Do you feel that Putin is totally unique, or if another person is replaced, then nothing will change? In a sense that another term that is sometimes frequently thrown around, bandied about, is Collective Putin. In a sense that Putin himself is just a kind of a face of a faceless corporation, and there will be the next representative from FSB who will take over, and nothing will ever change. Is that how you see the situation?
I think he's undergone several stages in his development, as it were. Originally, he was just a lowly third-tier KGB, functionary who only dreamed basically of getting to a place where he could just get some money. And then he started ascending towards the due to his, by the way, political instincts and his ability to keep his mouth shut and be completely unprincipled in the service of the superiors and so forth, he became irreplaceable to some people, and so he kept moving up the ladder. And at first, he was only interested indeed in protecting the corporation, in endless enrichment, in basically, making his close friends and cronies multi-billionaires, and himself unbelievably, unimaginably rich and so forth. But then several years ago, I sense maybe more than just a few, at some point after 2014, he's become this gloomy ideologue under the influence of fascist philosophers like Ilyin, whom he quoted today and called him with all kinds of superlatives, an ideologue of Russian fascism, essentially, Ilyin. And he became like this gloomy, messianic, dystopian person. His mind is not equipped for depth, but it contains, profound capacity for evil. And so he just became obsessed with the idea not to recreate the Russian Empire. I don't think it's about the Russian Empire, but he certainly is nostalgic for the Soviet Union. Even in his speech today, he sort of made the reference to what he once called the greatest geopolitical catastrophe of, and so I think he is just nostalgic for the 70s when he was a young man, and the time that I remember is fairly horrible. He's only several years older than me. We lived in the same city, in the same country, and we've probably viewed the situation very, very differently. So those gray, depressing, stagnating years of Brezhnev rule, he probably loved it, and loved belonging to this, fearsome, feared by everyone empire, the Soviet Union. So I think that's what, well, he's finding out that that cannot be done, because without basically conquering Ukraine, no, reconfiguration of Soviet Union is possible, and so the path is much thornier than he had thought. But I think that's his ultimate motivation.
Well, I think perhaps enough about Putin necessarily. Well, let's talk about the other side of Putin. Donald Trump is in never-ending stream of legal trouble.
We got to the point when, at the mention of Donald Trump, I involuntarily smile.
Is it the Schadenfreude?
It's not Schadenfreude, but it's just by comparison, it's a lighter subject, and he is a comic, cartoonish character, more or less. At least Donald Trump is not threatening us with nuclear annihilation. At last I heard, I don't know. Maybe he'll issue something.
Well, I think he was making some calls for civil war, but that's like it has to be.
Yeah,
it's always like, well, what he meant to say is.
Yeah. So let's talk about Trump. That'll cheer me up.
Right.
Yeah.
So I don't remember if we've met since he attempted to declassify things with his mind, which I just found so heartwarming.
It was nice.
It was nice. It was just like, ooh, this is really just a whole other level of like, oh, okay.
Yeah, you can declassify stuff, even having a dream about declassifying stuff.
Right. So you like, well, I guess, you're declassifying novels.
Yeah, I can declassify anything. I just thought about declassifying stuff. Yeah. Well, it's an endless saga, which is now sort of like development slowing down a little bit with Trump, I guess, because of the advancement of in advance of midterms. So nobody wants to make any like excessively kind of sharp moves, but and then there is Judge Eileen Cannon that is kind of behaving like exhibit of what happens when a totally unqualified person is basically put in a lifetime position of judicial power, and she's paying Trump back by being like a Trumpist. But nonetheless, sooner or later, I still think that the sheer accumulation of pressure on him, something will yield. He is, something will yield. There will be another January 6th open session at some point next week, postponed due to the hurricane, right, Ian? And it probably will be sometime next week or soon enough. And they will, apparently there is some new information there. Events sort of like are proceeding apace in Georgia. Massive civil suit in New York. At some point, I don't know, there is a sense that slowly but inevitably, inexorably, the noose just of law is sort of like beginning to tighten.
But at the same time, it appears that hurricane has missed Mar-a-Lago. So
well, yes, it's the internet meme, just showing Mar-a-Lago and saying, Ian, you only had one job. And but Ian decided, yeah. But then again, we can't, enlist powers of nature and like trying to fight American political battles. It's a little too much. They're hoping for the rain to flood this state.
Mikhail, well, I think for people in Russia, they always want to know, so is Trump going to come back?
I don't think so.
Right. But I think, right. I suppose that is a question in English as well, isn't it?
What? Is
That
Trump?
whether like, or is this an opener, or is it like there's nothing to discuss? Is it a given that Trump is going to lose if he runs?
If he runs, he will lose. In the parameters of his running, I think he is besieged by too many legal troubles right now to run. He will lose. Yeah. I don't even think that he will end up the nominee. The execrable Ron DeSantis would be in a better position to be the nominee. But he's also been actually now sort of like weakened by the hurricane, mainly because when he was member of the House, he voted against federal aid to New York State, right, in the wake of hurricane then. Now he, of course, immediately asked Biden, and because Biden is not Trump and doesn't, divide people, just condition aid based on people's political leanings, Biden immediately provided that aid. But then people are remembering the $12 million that he spent on this cynical prank with Venezuelan asylum seekers, right? And people are thinking that that money would have been much better spent on hurricane relief. And so, but no, who knows what Trump will do? But it seems like that train has left the station, it seems. So
if we get to the November elections, and we get through the November elections, and we see that Republicans are controlling House of Representatives and Democrats have greater control and expanded their margins, let's say, in the Senate, and obviously there's still a Democratic president. How do you see total gridlock, or do you see that there could be room for Biden to find some kind of consensus and bring people together?
It will be gridlock. He will be able to do something with the Senate, obviously, but the House will be a zoo. It'll be run by the Freedom Caucus, right? It'll be run by the likes of Matt Gaetz and Jim Jordan and Lauren Boebert and Marjorie Taylor Greene, and presided over by completely characterless, weak, kind of unprincipled Kevin McCarthy. So they will be trying to impeach Biden. That's how they will spend their time. They'll be holding Dr. Fauci in front of the House. They'll be conducting endless investigations because they have nothing. They don't have any policies to offer American people. They only have culture wars unlimited, and that's what they will be doing. So yeah, those 2 years will be very, very difficult years in American politics.
Does it mean that it will be important to then perhaps, I guess, to circle back, to finish Putin during the time that Biden is in office, during his first administration? Do you feel like there's urgency of dealing with Putin before we could possibly have somebody else at the helm?
But I think actually the majority, even of the Republican caucus in the House, they're still on board with Ukraine. I think it's just the outliers like Marjorie Taylor Greene and Boebert, that completely, the Trump Putin-esque kind of camp, but they're in the minority. I think that on that count, I think most Republicans are still kind of solidly behind Ukraine.
So no matter what happens in the elections in 24, the next president of the United States, you feel will be in support of Ukraine?
Oh, well, we're talking about 24 now, not 22. It depends. I think if it's like
that's what I'm saying. Yes, like if we expand the vision to the next presidential election, do you feel like there's sense of urgency for Biden to get this wrapped up during his first term?
It's in the interest of everyone to have it wrapped up before 2024. It's 2 years away. So it's unthinkable that this war will grind on for another 2 years. Hopefully not. But any system Republican, even if it's Ron DeSantis, he will be against for Ukraine and against Putin. Trump is in Trumpist MAGA camp is a different matter, but that's so far away. So much will change. As I mentioned earlier, I believe that in the next, it's a matter of weeks that events will accelerate to the point that we can barely follow. Things are happening very quickly now.
And that's another good question to, I suppose, to just, I'd like to get your take on. How quickly are things developing? Because if you look at what our military industrial complex is ramping up to do, is to produce a ton of ammunition, because Ukraine's going through it rather fast right now. So it needs to be dealt with. And of course, we need to have more and more. We have tradition. We are the peacekeeper, with the big stick in Teddy Roosevelt's tracks walking around. It seems like we're preparing for the long haul. But here you're saying we might have quick developments. Is it wise to worry about long haul in this situation?
In no way am I a military analyst, but
Right.
Or expert, but it is my understanding that actually the armaments that are being provided Ukraine are not the latest generation, are not the most potent, weaponry that the United States has, not by a long shot. That's my understanding from what I've read, and it actually would make sense. And even with this slightly outdated weaponry, Ukraine is kicking Russian army's butt. But I think there is an understanding in the West, largely, with a few exceptions, in the NATO, with a few exceptions, like Hungary, for instance, that Putin needs to go. That for as long as he is in the Kremlin, no dealing with Russia is possible, that it is a dangerous, belligerent, uncontrollable, totalitarian fascist state in its present incarnation. And so therefore, Putin needs to go. He needs to be gone. I think that understanding, yes, does exist. And it's whenever that happens, sooner the better.
Well, it seems like you're going to get your wish, but look at what he did today.
What did he do today?
You wanted him to be gone sooner. He annexes territory and so he's expediting things. Aren't you happy?
He's expediting chaos and craziness right now. Yes, he's making in the last several years, I would say, but especially with this war, he's been making one catastrophic mistake after another. In this case, I think his hand was forced. I don't think this, as I mentioned, this was on his timetable to now, federalize those 4 areas of Ukraine, which do not even belong to Russia in military sense, but not controlled by Russia, not controlled by their puppets. But I think it just lends a massive element of unpredictability to the whole thing, because we don't know if Ukraine keeps basically, demolishing Russian army and grinding it down in Donetsk, in Luhansk, in Zaporozhye, in Kherson. What would happen? How would Putin react? We don't know.
No, we don't. Or do we?
No.
Mikhail.
I don't. So
Okay. Well, I was going to say, do you think we're going to get together in a couple of weeks, or is the planet not going to be around? I don't know. I have a hard time taking this so seriously because it's almost like too much. Again, you're a writer. How do you process this conflict?
well, it's difficult to process right now. Yeah, it's the best way is to start thinking about something else and to think, or to write about something else. But in the back of one's mind, there it is, this insanity overtaking the world. But I do believe that in 2 weeks we're going to be all right. So we'll meet. I may not be in Montreal. I may be in New York. Say I'm going to visit friends, but nonetheless, we'll be there. So
that is good. And then I was also curious: do your students, do they ask questions about the war? Because I brought up with 2 different classrooms, and there was one student between 2 classrooms that was interested. And he was asking about the state of who's winning right now and like what's going on. Very, very broad strokes. Are you dealing with really engaged students who are paying attention, or are they like, let's talk about the subject?
Well, I teach creative writing, and so advanced undergraduate and graduate workshops. So that's what I do. I don't start that conversation, and they don't ask me questions, quite frankly, about it. Although I did mention to them, just in a literary context, that a couple weeks ago I attempted sending through my university mail my humble book of short stories to a friend in St. Petersburg, and Canadian Post, having actually, charged the university for the mail to the tune of $20, returned the parcel, which I found in my mailbox, because apparently there is no postal connection with Russia right now. Mail is not delivered from Canada to Russia, or from the United States, as I was told, either. And that has never happened in my memory, even the darkest times of the Soviet Union. Obviously, mail was often the last connecting, kind of connection with the outside world. But there you have it. It's too dangerous to deliver mail to Russia right now. So,
and that's I guess that leads me to this question: how will we know that Russia has become North Korea? Is that like now because the mail is not showing up, or is that when they cut off YouTube, or do you have like a red line?
No, the most of the websites like YouTube, like Facebook, like Twitter are only accessible, of course, through VPN in Russia. In other words, they've been switched off, but I guess they cannot attend to every small detail, but they could technically ban VPNs as well. They could close the borders, and there is talk about that. But apparently it also serves the regime's interest to let out the steam and let go of the people who aren't happy and so forth. No, we don't know. I think, but the footage that is coming from Moscow today, this tremendous Nuremberg rally in the Red Square, with Putin yelling and assorted crazed stars shouting and threatening the West. The country has lost its mind, and most people are just trying to cope with it. I think it was kind of instructive and interesting to see the faces of Russian political, quote unquote, in double quotes and triple quotes, elite at Putin's speech in the Kremlin, at his announcement of annexation of the and incorporation of all those 4 areas of Ukraine into Russian Federation, gloomy funereal faces. They all know where he's leading them. They all know that he is borderline insane with his crazy, disjointed, anti-Western, rhetoric, with his belligerent talk. But there is nothing they can do. They're paralyzed with fear, and it's the gathering of the doomed. How are they? They will never see. They know that the days of their visiting Europe or America are gone. And they know that hardship is ahead. They know that they're hated in the world. They know that their children, who are primarily Western educated and living in the West, will be, in trouble and so forth. So they all know, but there is nothing they can do against this tiny little man.
That could be a great song, Tiny Little Man.
Tiny little man.
Mikhail, what do you think about all the talk in Russian that we have a chance to comment on in English? Because I think it is kind of at least important to acknowledge. In Russia, who is going to say no to Putin? It's not going to be anybody anywhere near power. But there are some notable people. Who are these notable people? These are frequently artists, singers, rockers, musicians, because in Russia there's also a very high culture of respect for skill, and so very accomplished artists and musicians and artists, actors are very much respected, I feel. And so we have these artists who take different side of whether they are with the state or not with the state, whether they remain in the country, whether they leave the country, how does that affect what's actually happening in Russia? Does this have any sort of, like, when they speak out, is this just kind of like, as they say, shaking the air? Or is there some real consequences, importance to those pronouncements of being either opposed to Putin's war or in any way being critical of the regime?
Well, there is no mass movement of well-known Russian, performers or artists living in Russia and expressing their dissatisfaction with the war. It's just in present atmosphere, it's just impossible. So the only exception was Alla Pugacheva, indeed, who is not just a superstar. She is a, fixture in the lives of generations. Me as a teenager. And there was a joke in Russia, in the Soviet Union, that Brezhnev was a second-hand political leader during the era of Alla Pugacheva. So she is in a very special situation. She is so immensely popular that Putin would not, and his propaganda couldn't criticize her when she basically came to the defense of her husband, Maxim Galkin, who is in Israel, who is a famous entertainer, but nowhere near in the same league as her. No one is in the same league as her. But famous people like performers, like bards, like Grebenshchikov, or people, Makarevich and so forth. They're all abroad. Most of the people who want to freely express themselves are abroad, because it's just very unsafe to do right now in Russia, unless you're Alla Pugacheva, in which case the propaganda will just pretend that you didn't say anything at all. They'll just, and so forth, because she's just too big to be, sort of to be harassed. But otherwise, no one is exempt. No one from the regime's wrath. So yeah.
I'm just so fascinated with this concept of people hearing about this war of conquest that was happening somewhere else, and they could watch it on TV and cheer on and for their team because it didn't cost them anything. And then all of a sudden they get a notice in the mail saying, now you're part of this. show up and you're going to be going to the front lines and you have no idea what to do, how to do this job, because you don't know. And you also know that pretty much everybody, you know, that goes has either an injury or dies. So like people are talking about breaking arms, hands, and running away. So it's a fascinating, just historical moment. I don't know how else to say this, but that's why Mikhail Iossel is a writer, wonderful writer with books that you should obtain. And we will continue this conversation in a couple of weeks. Sounds good?
Sounds all right. Sounds good, Victor. Yuri, we'll be here. We'll
Fantastic.
be here. You'll be in Wisconsin. Which
you might be crossing the border.
I may be crossing the border, but not to Wisconsin. But yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, it's a large country.
Yeah.
All right, Mikhail. Well, thank you so much. You're listening and watching Rashkin Report. This is Yuri Rashkin. Take care. We'll see you in a couple of weeks with Mikhail. I'll be back probably in much sooner. Stay tuned. And thanks to everyone who's supporting Rashkin Report on Patreon. You are watching Rashkin Report.